The ballroom at Evermere House shimmered with deceitful beauty that winter night, chandeliers dripping like frozen tears, violins whispering promises no heart could afford to believe. London, at the height of its season, was a city obsessed with surfaces, and few faces gleamed brighter than that of Adrian Hawthorne, Duke of Ravenshire. His reputation, polished by generations of honor and recent whispers of financial ruin, made him the most watched man in the room. Every dowager with a daughter, and every daughter with ambition, studied him like scripture. Adrian stood at the edge of the crowd, posture composed, expression inscrutable. He had inherited a title weighed down with pride and a fortune eaten alive by debt. The late Duke, his father, had been a man of charm, but charm was a poor accountant. There were estates to save, creditors to silence, and a lineage to preserve. And so, like every man raised in duty's cold nursery, Adrian had learned to turn sacrifice into strategy. That evening, he was to secure the alliance that would mend his house's cracked foundation. Lady Beatrice Harcourt, the only child of a shipping magnate with more wealth than wit, was to be his salvation. She was lovely in the way wax fruit is lovely, flawless, gleaming, and utterly without flavor. Their match had been arranged with such efficiency that affection had never been invited to attend. He would offer his name, she, her dowry. Together, they would manufacture stability. He told himself it was sensible. He told himself it was noble. He told himself 100 things that sounded like wisdom and tasted like ash. "Your Grace," drawled a familiar voice. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, appeared at his elbow, her fan fluttering like a scold. "Lady Beatrice is waiting for your attention. A woman does not enjoy being ignored by the man who intends to ruin her freedom. Nor does a man enjoy being reminded of his obligations every 5 minutes," he murmured, his mouth curving in a ghost of a smile. "Obligation," she said, snapping the fan shut, "is the spine of our family name. You will thank it when affection has deserted you." Adrian inclined his head, unwilling to argue with the woman who had once stared down Parliament itself. He turned toward the crowd, ready to play his part, when something, or rather, someone, caught his attention. At the far end of the ballroom, where the golden mirrors gave way to shadow, stood Evelyn Marwood. He did not know her. He should not have noticed her. And yet he did. Her gown was not the color of the season, not icy blue nor delicate rose, but a deep emerald that dared to contradict the candlelight. Her copper hair was arranged without artifice, her jewels modest, her bearing too still to be fashionable. Yet there was something in her stillness that held the room hostage. She stood beside a cluster of laughing girls, her expression one of quiet amusement, as though she had read every conversation before it was spoken and found them all slightly wanting. Their eyes met once. It was an accident of geometry, nothing more. And yet, in that fraction of a moment, Adrian felt something shift, the fragile architecture of his composure faltering under a gaze that saw straight through the marble. She did not smile. She did not curtsy. She simply regarded him as one might regard a thundercloud, impressive, inevitable, and faintly ridiculous. Lady Beatrice found him moments later, trailing the scent of lilac and parental ambition. "Your Grace," she began, dipping with perfect decorum, "how kind of you to attend. My father is most eager to discuss the future." "Indeed," he said, and every syllable felt like a signature on his own sentence. They danced. It was a technically flawless waltz, 2 figures moving through an equation of elegance, but the music might as well have been silence. Across the ballroom, Evelyn watched, unblinking. Adrian's steps faltered once, only once, but it was enough. Lady Beatrice followed his line of sight and saw her too. Her smile thinned. "Do you know her?" she asked. "No," he lied, though the word carried a curious ache, as though he wished it were otherwise. When the music ended, polite applause rippled like rain. Adrian escorted Lady Beatrice to her seat, bowed, and excused himself under the pretense of refreshment. He had no intention of returning. He needed air, distance, distraction, anything that would smother the absurd spark that had dared to live in his chest. In the card room, he found none of it. Men spoke of horses, of Parliament, of women as if they were interchangeable currencies. He joined them, pretended to listen, and discovered that his thoughts kept wandering back to the woman in green. He lasted precisely 12 minutes before yielding to curiosity, or perhaps to fate's cruel humor. Outside the ballroom, the marble corridor was cooler, quieter. A breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine from the courtyard. And there she was again, Evelyn, standing before a painting, alone. The portrait was of some forgotten duchess with perfect posture and a tragic history. Evelyn tilted her head, studying it with a small, knowing smile. "She looks bored," Adrian said before he could stop himself. Evelyn turned, startled, then recovered with disarming calm. "Perhaps she was," she said softly, "or perhaps she was simply waiting for someone interesting to speak." "Then I have interrupted her disappointment," he said, managing a faint smile. "I would not presume," she replied, eyes glinting. "But if you wish to join her in boredom, I am certain she would approve." Her wit was sharp but not cruel, the kind of intelligence that could unravel a man's defense without ever raising its voice. He should have left then. Instead, he stayed. They spoke of art, of duty, of the peculiar absurdity of living under constant observation. He found himself laughing, something he had not done in weeks. She, in turn, seemed surprised that a duke could be capable of humor. "Do you always speak so freely, Miss Marwood?" he asked. "Only when I am certain it will be forgotten," she said. "Then I am already in your debt," he murmured. The dowager's voice interrupted them like a sentence ending too soon. "Adrian," she said sharply, "Lady Beatrice awaits your company." Evelyn curtsied with perfect composure. "Then I shall relieve you of the scandal, Your Grace." He bowed slightly. "Miss Marwood." And then she was gone, leaving behind only the faint echo of laughter and the unbearable knowledge that, for the first time in his well-ordered life, duty felt like defeat. That night, long after the carriages had rolled away and the candles burned low, Adrian sat at his desk, staring at the marriage contract awaiting his signature. The ink shimmered beneath the lamp. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet, relentless, pure. He thought of her voice, of the way she had looked at the painted duchess and seen herself. He thought of how easily she had spoken truth into a room built on pretense. He thought of the word interesting, and how, for the first time, it had sounded like a prayer. When he finally dipped his pen into the ink, his hand hesitated. It was only a moment, the faintest tremor of rebellion, but in that instant, the Duke of Devonshire learned the first dangerous truth about love. It waits for no man's permission. Morning has a talent for pretending it knows nothing of the night. It arrived at Devonshire House with its usual courtesies. Coal scuttled efficiently, curtains drawn back with military optimism, coffee marched in like a sermon, and found Adrian Hawthorne already at his desk, learning how little sleep can do when memory has decided to stay awake. He signed papers, refused invitations, approved seed orders for the western farms, and discovered that each sensible act only sharpened the single insensible image he could not dismiss. A woman in emerald standing calmly in the corner of a ballroom as if she had mislaid her place in a fable and decided to improvise a better one. He told himself that fascination is merely distraction with better tailoring. He told himself that men with old names and new debts cannot afford interesting thoughts. Then he told himself nothing at all, because the butler announced Miss Evelyn Marwood. She had not come for him. She had come for Thomas, his late cousin's boy, brown-eyed, book-shy, motherless, whom Adrian had gathered into the house as one gathers a storm-struck fledgling. The child's tutors had proved expensive and useless in equal measure. The dowager, with the particular genius of women who cut Gordian knots with knitting needles, had engaged a new instructress recommended by the vicar's wife, accomplished, discreet, unafraid of stubborn boys. No one had mentioned emerald, gowns. Evelyn entered the study with the air of a woman who has learned to be polite to catastrophe. In daylight she was less dramatic and more impossible. The lamplight of the ball had flattered her, morning clarified her. She curtsied, poised without stiffness. "Your Grace." "Miss Marwood," he returned, the name tasting both dangerous and correct. "You come recommended." "That's a relief," she said gravely. "I seldom arrive with trumpets." Thomas peered from behind a ledger like a wary animal. Evelyn lowered herself to his eye level and produced from her reticule an object that would redraw the house's afternoon, a small glass prism on a ribbon. "For a brave gentleman," she said, "who will help me catch the sun." Thomas, who had previously believed most adults to be conspirators against useful mischief, reached for the prism as if accepting a treaty. Within 10 minutes he was discussing light as if he had invented it. Within 15, he forgot to be shy. Within an hour, the boy who had declared Latin a crime was declining Rosa with the enthusiasm of a man acquitted. Adrian stood back, learning what gratitude feels like when it startles pride into humility. Evelyn did not flatter the child's intelligence, she put it to work. She did not praise his attention, she trained it. She coaxed him with experiments, a paper cone to magnify whispers, a saucer of milk to sketch ellipses in spilled sunlight, a passage from Plutarch about courage, read as if courage were small enough to fit in a pocket. When Thomas stumbled, she let him do so, and then showed him how to stand up without ceremony. "We will not be splendid today," she told him. "We will be steady." After lessons, she asked permission to use the music room. She did not ask to be accompanied. She simply walked there as if rooms were invitations rather than thresholds. Adrian, who had never been accused of curiosity to its face, found himself following at a distance that could later be mistaken for accident. The music room had been designed to flatter instruments and people equally. Light fell onto the polished lid of the pianoforte like a blessing rehearsed. Evelyn removed her gloves, sat and played, not the fashionable bravura pieces that break a woman into ornament, but something simpler and truer. A prelude by Clementi, notes placed like careful footfalls across a stream. Thomas sprawled on the carpet with the prism, set rainbows climbing the wall in time. Adrian watched her hands, capable, unfussy, ringless, and felt the peculiar ache that attends the sight of competence when one has been fed on charm. He remembered Beatrice's flawless steps, the lacquered waltz, the contract waiting for his name. He remembered, too, a portrait of a forgotten duchess looking bored. "You play as if the song is a task worth finishing," he said when the last note settled. Evelyn looked up with that precise half-smile which had already learned his defenses. "Some tasks are songs, Your Grace, and some songs are work." He laughed quietly. "You have a habit of making sense sound subversive." "That is because sense is rarely fashionable," she said and turned a page. Days arranged themselves with alarming convenience. Evelyn came each morning precisely at 10. By 10:05, Thomas had surrendered. By 11, rainbow warfare had resumed with improvements. At noon, the household discovered that a boy who learns has an appetite that embarrasses the pantry. Adrian pretended to be merely a grateful guardian. He signed correspondence in the adjoining study with his door open an inch wider than dignity requires. He discovered that he could identify Evelyn's approach by the cadence of her footsteps, decisive on stone, cautious on carpet, unafraid of silence. They spoke more than they should, and less than they wanted. In the corridor she observed, almost idly, that the south roof leaked under the third cornice. He ordered repairs before admitting he had never noticed. In the library she found a Herodotus with a binding too fine for its scholarship, and teased him into defending it. He did, badly, and enjoyed the failure. She teased Thomas, too, and the boy bloomed under it like a rose with a well-timed insult for water. One afternoon, a thin rain pinned them indoors. Evelyn brought out a reader and asked Thomas to choose. He chose Shakespeare because boys like the sound of knives gossiped about in public. She began Julius Caesar without apology. When she reached Cowards Die many times before their deaths, her voice did not swell like a theater. It steadied, as if speaking to one man hiding in a crowd. Adrian, at his desk, felt the line find him with indecent accuracy. He did not look up. She did not look over. Thomas asked what coward meant. She explained gently, and for the rest of the day, the Duke signed nothing that mattered. Evenings grew inconvenient. He began to think about what she would have thought of his decisions long after she had gone. He discovered that he composed better letters when he imagined her reading them. He found himself measuring the distance between sense and subversion and discovering it to be the breadth of her palm. The house changed its weather. Servants who understand love before its owners do began to smile at the wrong times. The dowager watched from the embroidery frame with the wary affection of a general who hears distant music and recognizes a marching band. Lady Beatrice sent notes that sounded, even on paper, like entitlement attempting charm. The marriage contract lay in its drawer, waiting with patient malice. In the music room, shadows learned a new trick. As Evelyn played, the polished lid of the pianoforte gathered reflections, her face thoughtful, Thomas's prism throwing little galaxies, and sometimes in a skewed silver corner, the still, tall figure of a man who had come to the doorway to listen and had forgotten to keep his distance. She noticed, once, and only once, their eyes met in the reflected plane, no one's property, and the moment felt illicit for reasons that had nothing to do with scandal and everything to do with honesty. She dropped her gaze to the keys. He left before he could decide whether to stay. On a Thursday, duty broke cover. The Dowager requested Evelyn's presence in the morning room with the particular sweetness that means strategy. The conversation was short, elegant, fatal. "My son is to marry Lady Beatrice," the Dowager said, threading her needle. "Soon." "So I have heard," Evelyn answered, hands folded in her lap as if calming a bird. "You are clever," the Dowager went on. "Clever women are either very useful or very dangerous. It depends on whether they know when to leave." Evelyn did not, to her credit, ask leave what. "I will not harm your house, your grace," she said. "Good," the Dowager replied. "Then you will not let my son harm himself." Evelyn's composure trembled for the first time. "I do not command the Duke." "No," said the older woman, gentler than anyone deserved. "But you could persuade him not to become a man he would despise. Sometimes that requires absence." Evelyn stood, curtsied, perfect, and left the room walking as if she were balancing someone else's future on her head. That afternoon she taught Thomas as usual, patient, bright, undiminished to the naked eye. When the lesson ended, she handed the boy the prism. "Guard it," she said. "It belongs to brave gentlemen." Thomas promised, solemn as an oath. Adrian met her in the corridor by accident that had practiced all day. "Miss Marwood, Evelyn," he said, and the name broke rank. "You cannot imagine." He stopped, because smart men know when words will expose them. She saved him. "I can imagine a great many things, your grace," she said softly, "but imagination will not be asked to sign the register." He searched her face for irony and found mercy instead. "Stay," he said, before pride could tighten the sentence. "For Thomas, for the work, for—" She shook her head, and the smallest grief crossed her expression like a bird's shadow. "For the work, I must go. It is the only way to leave the work intact." "What have they said to you?" "Nothing," she lied, but kindly. "Only what I already knew." He wanted, absurdly, to take her hand in a public corridor and promise her safety in a language he had not yet learned. He did not move. She inclined her head, and the gesture felt like a farewell disguised as respect. That night he tried to sign the contract again. He managed a date. His hand refused the rest. He walked the length of the gallery where ancestors glared down as if romance were a vandalism on their portraits. He ended at the music room. The door was ajar. The pianoforte lid, closed, showed nothing but the Duke staring at himself, and discovering that he had aged a year since noon, he went to the window and pressed his forehead to the cold pane, as if the glass could teach him restraint. In the courtyard below, a carriage lamp flared. Evelyn stepped into it, cloak dark, posture quiet, a small valise in her hand. She did not look up. People who have practiced leaving know that windows only tell you what you cannot endure. The carriage rolled away. He did not move until the lamplight dwindled into a pin he could have worn on his heart if it had the decency to be solid. In the morning, Thomas asked where Miss Marwood had gone. "To catch the sun," Adrian said before he could censor himself. The boy nodded gravely and lifted the prism to the window. A thin rainbow leapt to the ceiling and settled there like a vow. Adrian watched it and understood the mischief of truth. Discipline had always taught him to steel himself against desire. No one had warned him that desire sometimes arrives, carrying discipline in its pocket, ready to teach a man how to live. Rumor seldom begins with a trumpet. It clears its throat behind a fan, borrows a respectable cough, and enters a drawing room wearing someone else's good name. This one started on a Tuesday at the opera, harmless as a whisper, vicious as a habit. The Duke of Ravensshire keeps late hours in the schoolroom. The instructress is pretty in daylight and perilous at dusk. Boys learn Latin, dukes learn audacity. By Wednesday it had acquired details. By Thursday, it had acquired witnesses. By Friday, it had acquired a certainty that did not require truth. Ravenshire House felt the change first in temperature. Footmen stopped meeting one another's eyes. The housekeeper, who had weathered 3 dukes and 1 revolution of curtains, grew short with kindness. Thomas, alert in the way children are to the weather of grown men, carried his prism like a talisman and stayed near windows as if light were jurisdiction. Adrian signed papers faster than sense allowed and spoke to no one unless the sentence could pay rent. By noon, the dowager arrived at his study with the demeanor of a verdict. She did not sit. "You will end this," she said quietly. "End what?" he asked, and surprised himself with the poverty of the question. "The story they prefer to the truth," she answered. "Stories do not require proof. They require appetite. London is starving." He stared past her shoulder to the rain beginning its rehearsal along the glass. "She has done nothing wrong." "Which is the most dangerous thing a woman can do," the dowager said, not unkindly. "It deprives men of excuse." She set a sealed note upon the desk. "From Beatrice's father. The wedding is to be advanced. We must give the city a conclusion before it writes one for us." He did not pick up the note. "And Evelyn?" "Will be gone by evening," his mother said, and the thread of gentleness in her tone made the word gone sound like a mercy and a wound at once. "I have spoken with her. She understands what a woman must sometimes do to preserve a man's better self." "Does she?" he said, and knew then that rage in a civilized man is simply grief with correct posture. He went to find Evelyn, and nearly convinced himself he meant only to thank her. He found her in the schoolroom stacking readers with the tidiness of someone preparing the world for an absence. Rain scored the windows. Thomas watched from the hearth, holding his prism against the firelight as if trying to trap summer. "You should not have come," she said before he spoke. "I have come to apologize," he replied, though apology felt like a coin too small for the price of the hour. "For what you have not done." Her smile was a thread that refused to break. How exhausting. "For what I have not prevented," he said, "which is worse." She closed the last book and set her hand on it as if it were a sleeping animal. "This is not your fault." "Fault is a luxury of the innocent," he said. "Guilt belongs to the responsible." "Then be responsible," she answered, still gentle. "Marry the lady, save the house, let the city entertain itself with boredom." He wanted to argue, he wanted to promise, he wanted to set the room on fire and be done with civilization. Instead, he said, "Thomas," and the boy looked up gravely. "Miss Marwood must visit her mother," Adrian managed. "We shall continue the lesson tomorrow." Evelyn took the lie without wincing. "Tomorrow," she echoed, and the word sounded like a prayer written on water. When she had gone to pack, Thomas approached with the difficult courage of children. "Is Miss Marwood in trouble because of me?" "No," Adrian said, kneeling to be defeated at eye level. "Because of me." "Then fix it," the boy said simply, as if roofs and reputations required the same hammer. The carriage arrived at dusk with the discretion of a sin. Adrian stood in the portico with rain misting his face and propriety cuffing his wrists. Evelyn emerged cloaked and calm, valise smaller than the absence she would leave. She did not offer a hand. He did not ask for one. She inclined her head, and he thought, wildly, that if respect had weight, the stone steps would crack under it. "For Thomas," she said softly, "I have left notes. He will pretend to dislike them and then devour them. He was born for mischief with consequences." "And his guardian?" Adrian asked, meaning, "Teach me." "His guardian," she said, "was born for duty with mercy. He has practiced the first and forgotten the second." He flinched. "Evelyn." "Do not use my name as a bandage," she murmured. "Keep it for when you mean to live." She turned to the coach. "Goodbye, Your Grace." He did not say stay. He stood still and let her go because a man who has been taught all his life to stand still in the presence of catastrophe does not learn running in a doorway. The carriage wheels found water and wrote, "They're cursive," into the street. He watched the lamps diminish until they became a twin star he could have charted his regret by. The rain, satisfied, became weather again. An hour later, he signed the marriage contract. He did it with the precision of a surgeon removing a necessary hope. The pen wrote what the man did not believe in: a date, a place, a name that was not the right one. Behind him, his father's portrait practiced disappointment. Beside him, his mother's silence offered shelter and cost. When he laid the pen down, the room grew colder, and he had the childish thought that paper draws heat. "Very good," the dowager said in a voice used for victories that feel like funerals. "We will have the invitations sent in the morning." He walked the house like a soldier, counting his men after a battle that had altered the country while leaving the field untouched. In the music room, the lid of the pianoforte reflected only himself and the long, arrested figure of a house that had learned caution's accent. He opened the instrument, pressed one key, and listened to the single note admitted could not be a song alone. Outside, rain stopped pretending to be anything but rain. The city swallowed the rumor, and finding it nourishing, asked for seconds. Beatrice's father sent congratulations written as invoices. Beatrice herself sent violets that smelled of sugar and obedience. Adrian put them in water, because manners are a religion for men without faith. The next morning, Thomas refused Latin on principle. "I shall not decline nouns for anyone who declines Miss Marwood," he announced with careful logic. Adrian dismissed the tutor and sat on the floor, a duke discovering that lessons are conducted just as effectively at the level where children keep their courage. "We will not be splendid today," he heard himself say. "We will be steady." Thomas, startled into loyalty, handed him the prism. Light scattered across the duke's sleeve like a rumor improving itself. By afternoon, the storm deepened. An undergroom reported that the river had opinions about its banks. The steward requested signatures that looked very much like surrender. The dowager whispered that Beatrice's trousseau was modern, which meant expensive. None of it felt like governance. All of it felt like penance without absolution. That evening, returning from a pointless conversation with a man who believed money a synonym for character, Adrian passed the small side door where servants come and go with the dignity of people who do actual work. The door was ajar. Voices murmured, "Kitchen pity, cleaner than the drawing-room variety." "Poor soul," said the scullery maid, whose hands had never learned idleness, "sent away when she'd done nothing wrong." "She'll be better for it," the laundress replied. "Men are training, some of them never take." Adrian kept walking until the corridor ended and admitted it had nowhere honorable left to lead. He tried to sleep. He failed at it like a gentleman, quietly, thoroughly. At 3 a.m, he stood in the gallery again, and the portraits declined to counsel. Down in the yard, a stable lamp burned with the patient boredom of things that no dawn comes no matter who deserves it. He went to his desk and took out the contract as one might take out a relic to test whether miracles have been miscatalogued. The ink had dried with arrogant confidence. He read the clauses through once and found that each "whereas" sounded like a door locking. He folded the paper precisely and returned it to its envelope without tearing. Destruction is easier than discipline. He chose the harder failure. Toward morning, a dream intruded, the kind made of memory edited by longing. A corridor, a painting of a duchess who had learned boredom to perfection, a woman in emerald regarding it as if refusing to inherit the expression. He woke with her name in his mouth and swallowed it like medicine. The city resumed its schedule. Invitations multiplied. Debt wore a mask called solvency. The dowager stopped speaking his first name and began to call him Duke, which is the family's code for do not collapse in public. He obeyed. Obedience has always been his finest suit. But the house had learned Evelyn's voice. The stair remembered her footfall and missed it. The pianoforte waited like a question. The schoolroom smelled faintly of lavender and chalk and something like reprieve. Thomas, undeterred by policy, anchored rainbows to the ceiling each morning and asked whether light can be stored for later. Adrian told him yes, and did not know whether it was true. At week's end, the final bans were posted. People who had never prayed began to congratulate God on his prudence. The scandal, sated, moved on to other amusements, and still the rain lingered, rehearsing winter. It would take one more sin, larger and more public than love, to liberate a man from the prison he had decorated. But for now, duty sat at the head of his table and carved the meat. He ate what was placed before him and pretended it tasted of anything but lack. Outside, the street shone black as a sentence. Inside, a prism on a child's string threw a small rebellion onto the cornice. Scarlet, gold, green, an impertinent promise that even carefully drafted darkness contains its own arguments for light. Scandal, like thunder, loves to strike where the air is already charged. It waited until the eve of his wedding, when the church flowers had arrived and the silver was polished to deceitful brilliance, before it broke its silence. The morning papers screamed in italics, "Forgery at Hawthorne Holdings, letters reveal fraud." Beneath, in smaller but more lethal type, the Duke's fiancé's father implicated. Adrian read the headline once and felt the floor shift under the weight of divine irony. All that he had sacrificed, his love, his honor, his peace, crumbled in a single column of newsprint. Duty, that idol he had worshipped for so long, now turned its face and mocked him. The city that had condemned him for a love he never took now condemned him for a sin he never committed. He was both villain and fool, and society adored him for it. By noon, the Harcourts had vanished behind their own curtains of disgrace. The engagement was quietly dissolved by Beatrice's mother, who sent back his ring with a note that smelled faintly of roses and reproach. "We regret what cannot be salvaged." By dusk, the creditors who once bowed at his door sent letters without seals. His mother paced the drawing room with a calm that would terrify angels. "We will weather this," she said. "We have weathered worse." But Adrian no longer believed in weathering. He believed only in consequence. And one name repeated itself between every breath: Evelyn. He had thought of her every day since her departure, but never with such violence. Her absence had been a quiet ache before. Now it was a wound that demanded treatment. He saw her in every unspoken word, heard her voice in every echo of his conscience. And when the whispers reached him that Evelyn Marwood's name had surfaced again in connection to the scandal, accused of conspiring with the Harcourts to destroy him, something inside him broke with terrible clarity. He left before dawn. The Dowager Duchess, finding his chambers empty, said only, "At last," and returned to her embroidery. The road to Somerset was long and merciless. Rain fell in cruel diagonals, drumming against his cloak, his resolve, his guilt. Each hoofbeat of his horse felt like the echo of a heart that had forgotten how to belong to its owner. He had not written ahead. There was no plan. There was only the furious need to see her face and confess what silence had done. By the second evening, the moors rose up around him like old gods muttering judgment. Windmere Cottage came into view at twilight, a modest house of stone and ivy, defiant in its solitude. Light glowed faintly from one window, a warmth that could only belong to her. He dismounted before the gate, soaked and shaking. The world smelled of rain and repentance. When he knocked, there was a pause, a heartbeat, a memory, and then the door opened. Evelyn stood there with a lamp in her hand, its glow soft against her pale skin. Her eyes widened, not in fear but in recognition, an ache so familiar it made the air between them tremble. "Your Grace," she said, voice steady despite the storm, "you are far from your wedding." "There is no wedding," he replied, his voice hoarse, nor any grace left to address. She said nothing, only stepped aside. The gesture was neither invitation nor rejection. It was simply mercy. Inside, the cottage smelled of tea and paper, of the life she had built without him. A fire murmured in the grate. Books lay open on the table beside a half-finished letter. He stood dripping in her doorway, feeling like a trespasser in his own redemption. "I read your name in the papers," he said at last. "They have accused you again." "They accuse what they cannot understand," she said quietly, "and they forgive what they cannot remember. I am neither." He took a step closer. "I came to ask your forgiveness." "For what?" she asked, setting the lamp down. "For believing a lie? Or for not believing me?" "For both," he whispered, "and for every silence that made you pay for my cowardice." She looked at him then, really looked, the way only Evelyn could, as though she were reading every unspoken sentence. "Do you imagine," she said, "that confession restores what courage destroyed?" "No," he said. "I imagine it begins." The fire cracked between them. She turned away, walking to the window where rain traced silver scars down the glass. "I should hate you," she said softly. "I tried to, every day with discipline, but I could never hate the man who listened when no one else did." "Then hate the Duke," he said, taking another step. "He deserves it." "I think the Duke died the moment he let me go," she murmured. He stopped beside her. The storm outside had less fury than the quiet in the room. "Then let me live as the man who remains," he said. "No title, no inheritance, only truth." Her hands trembled against the windowsill. "Truth," she repeated. "You make it sound like forgiveness." "It is," he said, voice breaking, "because I am too late for everything else." And then, for the first time since that fateful night at Evermere, she looked at him not with accusation, but with the terrible tenderness of a heart that has forgotten how to protect itself. She reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of his soaked collar, tracing the cold line of his throat. "You are freezing," she said. "I deserve to be," he whispered. "Deserving," she said, her lips curving sadly, "has nothing to do with mercy." For a long moment they stood like that, two silhouettes against the rain, the firelight trembling around them like breath. Finally she said, "Sit. Warm yourself. Then tell me everything." He obeyed. He told her of the forged letters, of the ruined engagement, of the lies and the silence and the shame. She listened without interruption, her gaze fixed on the fire. When he finished, there was nothing left of pride between them, only the soft, fragile honesty that comes after a storm. When she spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I should send you away." "Yes," he said, "but you won't." "No," she admitted, "I won't." He rose then, slow and uncertain, and reached for her hand. She let him. Their fingers met, trembling, unsure, alive. The rain outside eased to a drizzle, as if even heaven had tired of punishment. Evelyn drew in a deep breath. "Do you intend to stay?" "If you will have me." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "We will see what the morning decides." And for the first time in his life, Adrian Hawthorne stopped chasing duty and let love choose for him. The next morning dawned reluctantly, as if the sky itself feared what truth would cost it. The storm had not yet left. It had only retreated to the hills, muttering like an old god nursing regret. The cottage sat in its hollow of wet earth and quiet defiance, surrounded by fields that glistened as though newly made. Adrian woke in a borrowed chair by the fire, cloak steaming gently, heart refusing to obey reason. He had slept the shallow sleep of the guilty, half dream, half punishment. Across the room, Evelyn moved with morning's grace, her hair unpinned, her sleeves rolled as she poured water into a copper basin. It was the simple intimacy of the scene that undid him, the domestic quiet he had never known he needed. "Tea?" she asked without looking up. "If you offer it," he replied. "Then you will take it," she said, handing him a cup that was chipped but clean, warm but trembling faintly in her hand. "You always did make things difficult, Your Grace." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying to resign the title." "Resignations," she said, sitting opposite him, "require acceptance." They drank in silence for a while. The world beyond the window was gray but honest. When she spoke again, her voice was low and steady, the kind that could rebuild or destroy with equal patience. "You have come to say something," she said. "Say it." He set the cup aside, hands unsteady. "I have lived my life by the measure of others, my father's debts, my mother's pride, society's applause. I mistook obedience for virtue and silence for strength. When you were sent away, I told myself it was necessity. I have learned since that necessity is merely cowardice written in fine ink." Her eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with recognition. "And now?" "Now I find I cannot breathe without the truth," he said. "And the truth is this: I love you. I loved you when I was too proud to speak it, and I love you now when I'm too ruined to deserve it." She turned her face away, staring into the fire. "Do not mistake remorse for love, Adrian." "I know the difference," he said. "Remorse begs forgiveness. Love begs nothing. It only remains." For a moment she said nothing. Then she rose, pacing slowly before the hearth. "Do you think it is simple for me?" she asked, voice trembling despite her control. To hear the words I once would have died for, spoken now that the world no longer approves of you? He flinched. You think this is about redemption? I think it is about timing, she said sharply. And timing, Your Grace, is the one cruelty you have mastered. He stood too, the distance between them small but heavy. I was afraid, he said simply. Afraid to lose what I had been told to protect. My name, my standing, my father's crumbling ghost. I chose Olive, it over you, and I lost them anyway. And now? She demanded. What do you expect of me? That I erase the nights you did not come, the mornings I woke to find the world convinced of my shame? No, he whispered, only that you let me carry it now. Her breath hitched, and when she turned, her eyes were no longer hard. They were human, furious, beautiful. You cannot carry what was never yours to bear, she said. You gave me your silence, Adrian. Do not think to steal my pain. He closed the distance between them then, reckless, rain-soaked memory returning like penance. Then let me stand beside it, he said. Let me stand beside you. She drew a sharp breath, as if the air had turned against her. Why now? She asked. Why after everything? Because, he said, voice breaking, I finally understand what love costs, and that it is worth the ruin. The storm outside chose that moment to break again, wind thrashing the shutters, thunder answering confession with applause. Evelyn stared at him, her chest rising and falling like the rhythm of a battle she no longer wished to fight. He took her hand, not as possession, not as plea, but as anchor. Evelyn, he whispered, I came to you without a name, without a future. I came because there's nothing left in me but you. Her fingers trembled in his, caught between surrender and self-preservation. The rain began to leak through the roof, one drop falling onto the table between them, darkening the wood like ink. I cannot promise you safety, he said, only honesty. I have had enough honesty to last a lifetime, she replied softly. Then let me offer peace, he said. The quiet kind, the kind we were denied. Evelyn drew her hand back and went to the window. Outside, the world was all motion and sound, chaos rendered beautiful. She pressed her palm to the glass, feeling the vibration of the storm. When you left me, she said slowly, I stopped singing. Not from pride, but because every song became a question. And now? He asked, stepping closer. She turned then, tears glittering in her eyes like rebellion. Now I'm tired of questions. She reached for him. He caught her, as if the years of restraint had all been practice for this one impossible act. The kiss that followed was not delicate. It was desperate, imperfect, human. It was everything that apology could not contain. When they parted, the silence felt sacred. Does this mean forgiveness? He asked, voice hoarse. It means beginning, she said. Forgiveness must earn its own hour. He smiled faintly, relief trembling in his shoulders. Then I will earn it every day. She touched his cheek, tracing the line where rain met skin. You may start, she said, by helping me mend the roof before it collapses. He laughed, a sound foreign to his own ears. Together, they climbed the ladder into the attic. Rain drummed overhead. As they patched the leaks, their movements clumsy but certain. Each nail struck was a promise, each laugh a truce. By the time the storm began to fade, they were drenched, breathless, and alive. As evening crept in, they stood at the window again, watching the last of the clouds retreat beyond the hills. The world below glistened with renewal, mud and sunlight conspiring toward forgiveness. Evelyn turned to him, her face caught between exhaustion and calm. You've always been a man who builds walls, she said. Perhaps now you will learn to build shelter instead. He nodded. If you will teach me. She smiled faintly. Only if you promise to listen. I've done nothing else since I met you, he said quietly. And for the first time in years, the Duke of Ravenshire did not feel like a title or a failure. He felt like a man rebuilt from honesty, standing beside a woman who had taught him how to survive it. The fire burned low, the rain stilled, the world exhaled, and when he took her hand once more, it was not as a plea, but as a vow. 1 year later, London opened its season with the usual symphony of gossip and gold. Carriages gleamed along Grosvenor Square. Debutantes practiced smiles that could survive judgment, and chandeliers rehearsed their old tricks of light and deception. Yet beneath the city's familiar performance, something had changed. A story whispered in corridors and parlors alike, a tale of the Duke who had chosen love over legacy, and the woman who had taught him how to survive scandal. It was spring again, when Adrian and Evelyn Hawthorne returned to the capital. Their marriage, conducted quietly in the chapel near Windmere Ridge, had been dismissed by society as a rustic whim, until the months passed and neither ruin nor regret followed. Instead, their estate prospered under Evelyn's honest management and Adrian's newly humbled labor. Together, they rebuilt not only the manor's roofs and accounts, but the fragile bridge between dignity and devotion. London, ever curious about what it cannot comprehend, sent an invitation wrapped in gold leaf and pretense. The Duchess of Clarendon requests the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire at her spring ball. The very words that once promised execution now sounded almost like recognition. Evelyn had hesitated, holding the card between her fingers as though it might ignite. "We need not go," Adrian had said. "I know," she replied, "but I think it is time they saw the difference between pity and grace." And so they came. The ballroom at Clarendon House was a cathedral of excess, crystal dripping from ceilings, violins whispering sins disguised as melodies. Yet when the couple entered, silence rippled through the assembly like the intake of breath before confession. Evelyn wore ivory silk embroidered with silver vines, her hair coiled simply, her neck bare except for a single pearl. She looked neither defiant nor ashamed, merely complete. Adrian walked beside her in black, the starkness of his attire drawing every light in the room toward her. Whispers followed, curious and cautious. "Is that her? The governess?" "No, the Duchess now. They say she rebuilt his estate herself. They say he ruined his own engagement for her. They say he smiles now." If she heard them, Evelyn gave no sign. Her poise was its own verdict. She greeted dowagers with courtesy, thanked barons for politeness they barely managed, and spoke to servants as equals. London, unprepared for a duchess who neither performed repentance nor courted envy, found itself disarmed. Near midnight, as the orchestra struck the opening bars of a waltz, Adrian turned to her. "Would you?" She smiled faintly. "Are you sure the city is ready for its lesson?" "Let them learn," he said, offering his hand. They stepped onto the dance floor, and the murmurs fell away. The violins rose, and for a moment it seemed as if the entire room had remembered how to breathe. They moved together in perfect, unhurried time, neither flaunting nor hiding, only existing within the quiet certainty of what they had endured. The chandeliers caught them in their slow revolution, light spinning off her gown like forgiveness finally visible. To the watching crowd, it looked like triumph. To them, it was peace. Halfway through the dance, he bent close, voice low enough for her alone. "Do you remember the night we first met?" "Every moment," she murmured. "You looked like a man studying imprisonment and mistaking it for duty." "And you," he said, smiling, "looked like the reason freedom terrified me." She laughed softly. "And now?" "Now I'm terrified of nothing but losing this," he said, his hand tightening gently around hers. "You won't," she replied. "We've already survived the only test that mattered." As the final note faded, they slowed to stillness. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then swelling, society's version of surrender. The Duchess of Clarendon herself descended from her throne of roses to offer a smile that bordered on apology. "Your Grace," she said to Evelyn, "it seems the city has misjudged you." Evelyn inclined her head. "The city is young. It will learn." Laughter rippled through the guests, uneasy but admiring. The music resumed, couples spilling onto the floor, eager to borrow even a shadow of their grace. Later, as the night waned, Adrian led her onto the terrace. The air outside was cool and clean, perfumed with lilacs and the memory of rain. Lanterns flickered over the gardens, casting soft halos across marble and ivy. "You have tamed them," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, I merely reminded them that gossip grows weary when faced with happiness." He looked at her, truly looked, and saw the woman she had become, no longer the quiet instructress, no longer the exiled governess, but a duchess carved from truth and endurance. "You have given me more than I ever deserved," he said. And you have learned to deserve it, she replied gently. He reached for her hand, thumb tracing the curve of her knuckles. Will you ever forgive me entirely? I already have, she said, but I will not stop reminding you why. He smiled then, the kind of smile that has learned to earn itself. And what of duty? He asked. Have we made peace? Duty was never the enemy, she said, glancing up at the starlit sky. It was only waiting to be redefined. They stood there for a long while, the city's murmur soft behind them, the scent of spring rich with promises kept. When the orchestra inside began the final waltz of the night, she turned to him once more. One more dance? She asked. Always, he said. They moved together under the open sky, without witnesses or applause, just the soft rhythm of their hearts keeping time with the wind. Her head rested against his chest, and for a moment the years between their first gaze and this quiet peace folded into nothing. When the music ended, she looked up at him, eyes glimmering like the edge of dawn. Do you know what they will say of us now? He smiled. That the Duke chose love over duty. No, she whispered, they will say he finally understood they were never meant to be apart. He bent and kissed her, lightly, reverently, as the first light of morning touched the horizon. The city that had once pitied them would awaken to a new story, not of scandal, but of grace, not of downfall, but of devotion earned the hard way. And somewhere, deep in the heart of London, a rumor began again, not cruel this time, but kind. They danced, and for once, love was enough,